This is Expedition Texas, the podcast, presented by Crazy Water. Hello, folks, and welcome to the brand new Expedition Texas podcast, creatively titled Expedition Texas, the podcast. I'm your host, Bob Malden, the host also of Expedition Texas, the writer of this book, Expedition Texas Tales from the Road, all about what we do in our travels across the state, going and exploring lost history in Texas. We started this show about 12 years ago, the TV show about 12 years ago, and we're starting this, the podcast, now. And what we're trying to do here with this podcast is something that we can't do with the show. We hear so many great stories that we go and we want to try to dig into and tell these stories, but if there's nothing to see, nothing visual, no place to take the cameras inside of, a lot of times we just kind of pass those stories up. Well, through the book, Expedition Texas, Tales from the Road, and through this podcast now, we are going to take you inside some stories that, behind the scenes on the TV show and into some stories that haven't been shown on Expedition Texas on TV yet. And so we're going to have guests in here. We're going to talk about some really cool things that are happening in some of the towns we have visited. And it's going to be a fun ride, and there's going to be a new podcast every week. So please tune in here to Expedition Texas, the podcast. Now, each and every week we are presented right here by Crazy Water. And what I love about our sponsor, Crazy Water, is that they themselves have a lot of history as well. I got my favorite number 4 here, Crazy Water number 4. And that's because the water comes from under the ground in Mineral Wells, Texas. This is the water that made that place famous. Mineral Wells is famous for their water. I mean, people used to come from all over the world, the rich and famous, and come to Mineral Wells to literally bathe in this water and the healing powers of the mineral water. There are several different wells around Mineral Wells, and this comes from well number 4, and we'll tell you more about what all these numbers mean here in just a little bit, but I love number 4 because it has the highest mineral content. And I don't know what that does for you, but we are going to have Carol Elder on as a guest at some point, and she'll tell us what all the numbers mean and what they all do. But with that said, and that drink taken, I am ready to introduce you right now to our very first guest here on the very first Expedition Texas, the podcast. He is the director of the Tyler Chamber of Commerce. He is a friend of mine, and he doesn't know this, he's actually part of the reason that this TV show, Expedition Texas, got started to begin with. And I'm going to tell him exactly how. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Henry Bell. Hi, Henry.
Hey, thank you for having me today, especially the first one. I'm really honored.
I might have dropped a little bombshell on you there. I don't know if you realized or not that you actually are partially responsible for 12 years ago, the idea of Expedition Texas.
I did not know that.
Okay.
And how did that come about? You've got to tell me now.
I am going to tell you how, because it happened in Rotary Club. I was working for Carter Blood Care at the time. I was doing public relations and marketing and that type of thing for the East Texas branch of Carter Blood Care, and I was a member of the Tyler Rotary Club. And I'd already kind of had the seeds planted of this idea of exploring lost history or doing some type of thing on TV because I'm a broadcaster by nature. I wanted to get back out there and do something in broadcasting, and I was already kind of playing around with ideas and show ideas. And then one day, whoever was supposed to give the presentation at Rotary that day, they didn't show up. And Henry's like, I got this. And Henry gets up and off the top of his head gives this amazing presentation on Tyler and history that you might not know if you live here and drive by it every day. These little hidden factoids about Tyler, this town that we live in, the town where Expedition Texas originates and originated, and where we're doing this podcast right now. And you told me so many things. You told the whole group. All these things we had no idea existed here in our own hometown. And it was the coolest presentation ever. And I thought, man, that guy is like a walking encyclopedia of knowledge about this town. Where did all that come from, Henry?
Well, I don't really know, but I tell people, I said, it's because I think I've been around for so long that I just absorbed it. I mean, I grew up loving history and loved studying history, but I didn't study it that much. And most of history is storytelling, in my opinion. And so over the years, I've had so many people tell me stories, so many family members, because I've got so much family, and it just absorbed. And then I've continued reading and researching. You know, the internet came along, so much more at our fingertips and that kind of thing. So it's just sort of absorbed. And in addition, different groups like Leadership Tyler and Rotary have asked me to do these presentations. And so now I've done it enough that I'll be telling a story or be making a presentation, and somebody in the audience will pull me aside later and go, "Did you know also this?" And so it just keeps collecting up here in this head of mine over the time. Now, I've had a lot of people after me like, "Why don't you write a book?"
It's a great idea.
I'm not a writer. I don't like writing a book, but everybody's after me, and I have many, many times thought of something that I wish I knew the answer to that I forgot to ask my father or some other community leader over the years, and you should have done that when you had the opportunity.
Yes.
So I'm kind of motivated to try to put some stuff down on paper, and I've had a few people offer to kind of help me with that. So
you definitely ought to. I mean, because there are things that, I mean, like you said, Leadership Tyler and Rotary Club, I've been in both of those, and I think I've probably heard your presentations more than once because of that. But what some of these stories, which we're going to hit on some of those, that is sort of the impetus of Expedition Texas. We go to towns now all over the state, and we're going in and we're looking for that history. Some of it that even the people that live in those towns don't know. And I want to get into the story that sort of started it all for Expedition Texas. That is sort of in the back of my mind. It's in the book, but we've never actually told the story on the show, and that's because visually there's just not a lot left to see. And it has to do with the lakes in the city of Tyler. And everyone kind of knows, if you live in a town, your lake is sort of where everybody goes for recreation. It's also most likely the source of your town's water supply. It's a good place to have a picnic, throw the boat in, those kinds of things. But I had no idea that the lakes in Tyler and the lakes that served the city of Tyler had such a history, starting with one that absolutely doesn't even exist anymore, and that's Victory Lake. So tell me about this lake and give folks kind of an idea of the location of it as you do.
Okay, so Victory Lake was one of the first original water sources for the city of Tyler when you had a official water source. Bellwood Lake is another one, but Victory Lake was right in the heart of town.
It is now. I guess it wasn't back then, though, was it? That was sort of southwest of town, or southeast of town, wasn't it?
I guess it was a little bit farther out at that time. However, I have recently seen an aerial shot where the lake was still there.
Really?
Yeah, and what's now UT Healthy Texas is there, too.
Yeah.
And it was built in the 50s. So that lake was still there in the 50s.
Wow, I had no idea.
And so if you know where Beckham is, and you know where we call the hospital district is,
yes,
and just west of Beckham is a street where you go down a hill between the two hospitals to Turtle Creek area, and there's a lot of little doctor's offices and clinics and those kind of facilities down there, and that's where Victory Lake was. Yeah. So it was on the west side of Beckham. And it wasn't really that large. It ran from Lake Street, where Lake Street gets its name, because it took you to the lake.
Uh-huh.
And then it ran north, not too terribly far, because when you go through Turtle Creek, you come out on Victory Drive. And Victory Drive is a street that's one of those double streets that has a median in between it, a natural median that runs all the way to Donnybrook. So if you're ever driving down Donnybrook, you see this is what I call double street. That's Victory Lane that led you to Victory Lake. Or you could get there from Lake Street all the way from Broadway to Beckham.
And that's what's crazy about that is, think about this, those folks who live around Tyler, or maybe your doctor is on Turtle Creek, your doctor's office would have been under the lake back then.
That's exactly right. I said, it was fairly small, and of course our population was smaller. And at some point we needed a bigger water supply, a bigger lake.
So you had told the story of Bellwood Lake also in that presentation, and Bellwood is a lake that is still there. There's a very nice development called the Cascades on one side of the lake, and there are areas that are closed off on that lake. And early on, and I tell the story in Tales from the Road, my kids and I took off and went on a little hike through the woods, followed a creek, to the spillway, which isn't much of a spillway, but there's a spillway at Bellwood Lake on the side of the dam, and on that side were a lot of picnic areas and covered up by years of fallen branches, and you had to pull them back, and there were little fire pits, and they were all built out of like that WPA stone type of work. And there's a picnic area you can still get to on the public boat ramp of the lake that's built out of the same stuff, but this was in an area where it's not accessible anymore, and it would have been at the end of Bellwood Road, which comes out of town and out that way. Tell me a little bit about Bellwood Lake, and I know you probably have a lot more actual memories of this lake because it came after Victory Lake, right?
Right. I have a little bit of memory. I can remember one of my grandparents taking me out to that lake because you described it was a park area that was also a public park because it was a public lake on that one side of the lake where you could go and people fished, people swam a little bit. There were picnic areas. There are some remnants of it there, and that particular road still runs all the way to Highway 31,
right?
And it comes out there, and that's how you can get to it. But the lake was built as a water source for the city. It's still a small water source for the city. At one time, it was supplying a lot of the water to the former Kelly Springfield tire plant, which needs a lot of water and that kind of thing. I don't know how much of it comes out now. It's been years since I've driven down that road, but you could tell the water department's equipment and stuff was still in there working. So yeah. I think if you look at the pictures in the book that we took out there, because I was telling the story of how we wandered up on the lake from that side, it looks like maybe it's been a few years since some of that stuff is operated now. Just their equipment's still out there. There's still a kind of a lift station out there. A small water tower is still out there. I don't think it's in service anymore. But that lake is now kind of finding a new life because of, in the last 20 years or so, because of the Cascades and what's been built up on that side of the lake. And there's a lot more recreation happening on that lake now. Yeah, absolutely. When the Cascades was developed, and literally half of the lake is now accessible and used, before the Cascades was developed, that lake was completely surrounded by kind of non-accessible type area, except for that little park. There's a little bit of a lot of development actually going on now, because that's on a part of Tyler on that west area of the loop, where now there's a lot of clearing happening on the other side of the Sam's Club building, which was all forest before. They're putting in a new Brookshire's grocery store in there and a few other things that are going to pretty much open up that entire side of town. So a lot of that could be kind of making a big comeback on that area. It really could, particularly on that area that's kind of gotten run down and stuff, because that new development's going to butt up right next to that lake. Yeah. So these are some of the things that Henry and I, or that I've heard Henry talk about before, and some of the things that stuck with me to start doing this show, and this history that was out there that, to us it's just this big waterway, but when you really poke around and start looking, this was like the place to go and spend a Sunday picnic with your family back in the day. And of course it was also the source of water for the entire city of Tyler back then. And so interesting stuff that Henry was able to tell us then. Those are kind of some of the things that I remember from that presentation, but there was a lot more, and we're going to get into that with Henry when we come back in just a moment. But first, we want to tell you about one of our great sponsors, the East Texas Oil Museum.
Do you love history? Do you ever wonder about the way things were almost 100 years ago in East Texas? Visit the Kilgore College East Texas Oil Museum to learn about the men and women who lived during the East Texas oil boom of the 1930s. Step back in time and visit Boomtown, USA, the life-size diorama of a town booming in oil. Step inside the general store and visit the shopkeeper. Head to the theater to watch the Great Oil Boom movie. And no visit would be complete without taking a quick journey on the elevator ride to the center of the earth to learn about all of the geology of the East Texas oil field. The East Texas Oil Museum is now open Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with last entry at 4 p.m. For more information, visit kilgore.edu/oil museum or find us on all the socials.
The waters of Mineral Wells, Texas have been making folks feel good inside and out since 1881. Maybe it's just because of the flavor. Maybe it's because they might have healed a crazy woman who drank from the well all those years ago. Yeah, crazy water comes from the name of the crazy lady who was healed by the mineral water in Mineral Wells. At least that's the way the legend presents it. Either way, you're crazy not to give it a try. Crazy water in Mineral Wells, Texas. Of course, you can get this at all Brookshire stores, which we know well here in East Texas, and stores all over the state. And if you're ever out in Mineral Wells, be sure to stop by the Famous Water Company. You can pick up your own case of crazy water. You can get it straight from the well there. And you can also go to the Crazy Bathhouse and get yourself a really nice, relaxing day at the spa, the way they used to do it back in the old days when folks would come from all over the world to Mineral Wells for this here crazy water. Our presenting sponsor here on Expedition Texas. And we're back here with Henry Bell now. And Henry, you were mentioning during the break that springs have a lot to do with even the water supply that predates Victory Lake here in Tyler, Texas. Tell me about that.
Well, we're very fortunate to have the water supplies that we do have in East Texas. Not all of Texas has great water.
True.
We're fortunately, we do. And it started originally with just natural water, which comes from springs that are down in the earth that produce water. And so there are a lot of natural springs in this area. Anybody that is in any kind of construction can verify that for you because it gives them fits when they're trying to do construction. There's particularly a lot of them in downtown Tyler and the downtown area. Ironically, where we've just closed a portion of that street, Spring Street, and that's where Spring Street gets its names, is there's a lot of springs in downtown Tyler, and in that part of downtown Tyler, there's a lot of springs underneath the ground. And at one time, and someone told me recently that you still can do this, there's a tunnel between the current jail and the current courthouse.
Right.
Tunnel's going to get rebuilt through all this construction that's coming up. But if you go down in that tunnel and you're really, really quiet and listen, you can hear those springs still running.
What? Well, now, if I'm not mistaken, that is the way that they transport the inmates from the county jail to the court for their trials. And so I hope I never find myself in that tunnel.
No, and I have been down there, but not as a criminal. But many years ago, or not many years ago, but until recently, the Leadership Tyler program, part of their curriculum, they would take a tour of the jail. Yeah. And it took them through the tunnel. And so that's where a lot of people that haven't been criminals have actually heard it.
See, I think they were probably doing construction on the jail during my Leadership Tyler experience. It was class 26, so it's been a while. And it's been about 12 years because it was right before we started the show. And I missed that portion. I need somebody. That's right. Somebody with some knowledge and some connections in the city of Tyler, I don't know who that would be, to get me in those tunnels so I can see.
Actually, I think it would be Smith County, not the city of Tyler.
Okay, so, yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, Smith County, they own all that.
Somebody told me, though, that runs Leadership Tyler for us, said that you really don't want to go on that tour anymore, and you may not want to go in there, so...
Why?
Tread lightly. You better do it though before they rebuild it. The jail's not being rebuilt, so the tunnel actually might be still used and improved over time. So you might can go down there eventually.
We're going to talk about what's happening in downtown Tyler here in a little bit because it's exciting. what's going on down there. Maybe not so much for fans of the current courthouse there, but we'll talk about all that here in a little bit. I want to get to all that, but first I want to go back in time again with Henry and talk about some of these things that you mentioned in that original presentation, which got the wheels turning in my head, and eventually, one of the many things that contributed to getting started with the TV show Expedition Texas. But Henry, kind of take us through some of the other things you mentioned in that presentation that you do about the history in Tyler, that unknown history.
In conjunction with the water, or just
everything? Everything. We've talked water. Let's go on. I think we've run water into the ground. Ha.
Well, one more thing is our water sources have grown.
Yes,
because this is one that I get the most amazing looks when I tell people.
Okay,
and so our water source moved to Lake Tyler and Lake Tyler East.
Yes,
and then eventually to Lake Palestine, which is really where we get most of our water today.
Yeah.
And by the way, we have enough water supply for the next 100 years.
Yeah,
so
I think we're good.
We're pretty good, but just a fact that kind of blows people's mind when I tell them. So I graduated from high school around here in 1972, and when I graduated from high school, Lake Palestine was not there.
Oh,
and most people go, "What?" It hasn't always been there.
Yeah.
Most of our lakes in the area are man-made.
Yes.
We have natural springs and tributaries from rivers that help end up eventually
so isn't
them.
Caddo Lake maybe the only lake in East Texas that's natural?
Caddo Lake is natural. I think there's one or two, but that's one that is. But
yeah.
Lake Palestine literally came online about 73, 74.
Yeah.
And that was just pure farmland, and other people had hunting lodges and stuff like that out in that area. And the Lake Palestine had been in the works for many years. It takes a long time to start to finish with a lake.
Yeah, I bet it does.
Imagine.
Yeah, because you're talking about land that is useful. That's now going to be under many, many feet of water.
Yeah.
From now on forever.
So I can remember when it opened, and the bridges that you cross.
Mm-hmm.
You're going from Smith County to Henderson County to Anderson County, which a lot of people don't realize that's 3 counties, because when you're in Coffee City, you're in Henderson County.
Yeah.
And then you go into Anderson County. So. When it first opened, you could go across those bridges, and you could look at lots and lots and lots of tree stumps.
Yes.
Where the trees were just cut off and then naturally let to rot and go away on their own and that kind of thing. So today you can't see it, but literally it did not exist. It takes a lot of money to build a lake, and so it takes partners to do it. So Lake Palestine was built 40% by the city of Tyler, 20% by the city of Palestine, and another 40% by the city of Dallas, who needed water desperately.
Oh, okay.
And it takes a larger city because it costs a lot of money to build a lake.
Yes.
And so that was our partners. And then many years after that, the city of Dallas sold their 40% to the city of Fort Worth. The city of Fort Worth now owns the waterway, and just in the last 5 or 6 years, completed their pipeline, and now the city of Fort Worth is getting 40% of Lake Palestine.
They're finally
for their water
it.
supply.
Wow.
So, yeah,
okay.
It's a huge underground, of course, pipeline. I'm told that the pipeline is so big you could drive an 18-wheeler through it.
Whew.
So
wow, that's a lot of water going through there. Then
I get questions about that, but I always get these astounding looks like, what do you mean it wasn't there in the 70s? But it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it has to come from somewhere. And what's cool about that lake is that the water comes from the Neches River, which actually bubbles up out of the ground in the Colfax area, which is where I grew up. And so in Colfax, you can't dig a hole this far into the ground
without hitting water,
without it filling up with water.
Yeah.
And it's not, I don't know what the content is. I don't know enough about water to tell you why, but it doesn't smell good. I don't know what the deal is. It's too close to the surface, I guess.
I'm sure.
But so there, and having worked with the city of Tyler for a period of time, I know that with Lake Palestine water, they have to do more to it to get it ready for human consumption than they do the water from Lake Tyler, which comes from a creek.
That's right.
So it's and I know why, because I was a guy. It didn't matter to me that the water stunk. I played in that water when I was a kid, and so I get it. I get why they have to do what they have to do to eliminate certain smells and tastes and things like that from that water, because it was I would always come in smelling a little funky after playing in the water as a kid. But so that is interesting though, from 1970, and it makes you wonder like what's still under that lake down deep, what all was there that they just it's just covered up with water now. There's a story, I believe it's out of Oklahoma, that there was a dance hall that Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys played back in the 40s, and they built a lake. That dance hall was under that lake for a very long time. Many, many decades later, recent history, they drained the lake and got rid of the lake, and the shell of that building was still there, and somebody came in and restored it.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, and so I don't know the details. If I knew we were going to be talking this much about lake and waters, I would have had that information handy to talk about. But yeah, that was a story that had been relayed to me, and a lot of the Western swing artists that still are out there playing were excited about the chance to maybe someday again play. And I believe it's like Big Beaver or something like that was the name of the club that ended up being underwater for many, many years until they didn't need that lake anymore and drained it, and there it was again, still there, what was left of it. So anyway, moving on though, Henry, other interesting history around the city of Tyler that folks may not remember. I know one cool thing has to do with one of the hospitals here, which opened early, actually, because of the explosion in New London. That was a big deal and a big reason for the start of the original Mother Frances Hospital, which is now Christus, right?
Right, which was our original hospital. That was the first hospital we actually had in the Tyler area, and because of that explosion, it opened just several days.
Yeah, they were getting ready to have the grand opening, I think, and then that happened, and there was a desperate need at that point, I guess, right?
Right. They had to immediately open it up to be able to service those victims of that explosion. It was a horrible time of history in East Texas.
We've got an episode actually coming up this season of Expedition Texas where we talk about that explosion and actually go to that school there. But some other interesting unknown facts about Tyler from your presentation. What else do you usually tell folks about that surprises them?
Well, I go down little rabbit holes all the time in different directions. And when somebody says something like you just did, it sends me down another hole.
Let's go. Let's dig.
So we mentioned that when Mother Frances Hospital opened, and it opened a few days late. Well, I bet you don't know why Mother Frances is located where it's located, which is a whole nother story.
Okay.
And so one of my grandfathers was a member of the Tyler City Council, and my grandmother, before she died, gave me this whole scrapbook she did on my grandfather while he was on the city council, which happened to be when the hospital opened, or when the hospital was decided where it was going to be, the construction and all of that. So you're thinking, well, why was the city involved? Well, I mentioned we didn't have a hospital for that. Mm-hmm. So the city was in the middle of trying to get us a hospital, and it had to be determined where that hospital was going to be. Much more political, if you can imagine. Everything's political today, but even back then it was very political. And there was a community-wide argument as to where it should be, and there were two locations that were fighting over, and one of them was right next to City Hall, where the old King Chevrolet, where we had the new development of the new apartments and everything. That was one of the locations that was being considered. Obviously, it did not go there. The other one is where it is. And they went back and forth. And, of course, you had the medical community who had their opinions. You had the non-medical community and other pieces. So this scrapbook I have has all that information, all the newspaper articles and all that about it. So, but there's some pieces in it that weren't. And that's the kind of the fun story that I know. So my grandmother said, now, where it is, your grandfather was prejudiced to that because that section of my family was actually from what they called East Tyler. So that put the hospital on the east side of town, which was important to him.
Yeah.
That was important to him. But if you'll ever notice the original building, which is still there, the hospital, which is the part right out on Beckham, it's up on a high hill.
Yes.
Okay, so when the hospital opened, it was not going to be air conditioned, okay? So my grandfather, in all his wisdom, had decided that was the best location for it because they could, up on that hill, they could open the patient's windows and the air would flow in naturally and it would help cool the patients more.
Oh,
and that's why he got several other city council members interested in that location, and that's where it needed to be as opposed to over by City Hall. And I guess they were enough influence. That's where it is, right?
I mean, I guess it would have been handy to be by City Hall, but if you think of how much Tyler and I say how much that area has grown, but only recently has it, because for a long time in those days, there was a lot more going on in downtown Tyler. There were businesses all out around there. It was a very well established area out there. And you mentioned King Chevrolet because that area, there were several car dealerships down there back in the day, right?
Yeah, it was kind of where almost all the car dealerships were. In fact, there was the Chevrolet dealership, the Ford dealership, the Cadillac dealership, and the Toyota Oldsmobile dealership were all downtown at one time. And if you notice, still today, you see a lot of car dealerships locate close to each other.
Yes,
which kind of makes sense. You go looking for a car.
Yeah,
you don't like this one. Let's go across straight to this one. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
but that was kind of the car dealership area, almost surrounded where the Oldsmobile one at Service Department is where the City of Tyler Planning and Zoning offices are now.
Oh,
that
really?
Was the Service Department.
Oh, wow.
That covered parking?
Yes.
That's in there? That
was the Service Department wow, that's unbelievable. There's so much of that's down there that they didn't build new. They just repurposed. I mean, the building, which is the Tyler Water Utilities, was one of the original police department buildings. And I think the one where finance was also a police department building, I might have those two confused, but there is a building that's down there that I believe is on Irwin. It might be Elm or back this way from Elm, but it's there was a building there that still looks like a showroom on the front of it. And then on that same street or one block up, there's a building that I've been very curious about that you were going to try to get us into for Expedition Texas at some point, because my and I don't know whatever became of that, but you're sitting right here now, so I'm going to remind you that we want to get into the AT&T building.
I thought I got you into that.
You got me in touch with somebody who never returned my call, and I was gonna have you smack them around a little bit or something so we could get in there.
So that AT&T building that you're talking about is actually on Elm Street.
Okay.
That car dealership with the thing is on Irwin, and they sort of back up to each other.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And so, and the AT&T building is 3 or 4 stories tall.
Yeah.
And back then, of course, it wasn't the AT&T building. It was the Southwestern Bell or Bell Telephone building. Yeah. It's where the telephone operators were. Yeah.
And the reason I want us to
floors of teleoperators.
Yes. And the reason it's a huge building, which was I guess would be like where the switchboard operators were actually connecting calls, like back in the day when you really did put somebody through. And what I'm curious about, the age of that building, and there's so little of it that's actually used anymore, is if there are any of those old switchboards in there or anything like that we could see something like that in its original natural habitat. You see these things in museums and all that, but I mean in the actual building where that all came and where it all took place would be so cool to see. So hint, Henry.
Let's take a shot. Let's take a shot of that again.
Yeah, let's
see
do.
if I can't do that.
You could come in there with us.
I got in that building one time, but it was because somebody in there wanted something I had. But I didn't get past the entryway, so I don't know if it's a big secret or what. But
I don't know. We need to figure out who
makes
we know.
me more curious.
Yeah, that works in there because it does make me very curious too. Because that's one of the most interesting things that we do and see sometimes on Expedition Texas is when we can go into a place and it looks like one day 30 years ago everybody got up and left work for the day and then just never came back. And there are places like that where we go in and it's like, oh wow, this is like taking a trip back in time. I mean, one of my favorites was in the first season. We went to a company town. It was a mining town of New Gulf, and we went into their labs, and there were early 80s models of computers sitting in there, which were not the actual computers. They were the workstation, which connected to the big computer, which was in a room down the hall somewhere. And the guy that was our guide picked up this thing that looked like a trash can lid. It was about, 2 or 3 feet across, and it had a handle on the top of it. And he said, "Do you know what this is?" No clue. He says, "This is a hard drive. It holds 20 meg, not gigs, 20 meg. And every day at the end of the workday, we would have to take it down to the bank, to the big mainframe computer, and dump it so that we could use it the next day." And that was their hard drive.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, it was awesome.
We've come a long way.
Yeah. So, I mean, they still had like lab equipment. They had beakers. They had things full of chemicals still in refrigerators that hadn't been turned on in decades. I mean, it was crazy. But, there's stuff like that around. So, like in my head, I imagine that there might be parts of that AT&T building that are like that we could show in their, kind of the way they were left. But, again, I may just be dreaming because that's making that up, and they probably cleared it all out and thought they were going to do something with it at some point. But it's a huge building. All right, Henry, let's keep on through your presentation here. More of the fun stuff that folks don't know about Tyler, Texas.
Something you said something else that made me think of something else.
Let's just go down these rabbit holes. That's
you
what
just
we're here
said
for,
Elm
man.
Street, so a lot of people don't know that originally all of the streets in downtown were named after trees.
Okay,
and they're not all named after trees anymore. And the stories of why they're not are what's kind of interesting. You've still got a few. You've got elm, and you've got bodark.
Yes.
And those are both trees that are still downtown. But both Ferguson and Irwin and College Street all had different names. And one of them was Hickory, one was Cherry, and one was something else, Birch or something like that. They were all tree names, so they got named over time. So as the town grew, and literally the town was around the square, and you have to imagine dirt roads at that time and that kind of thing. So there were a couple of families that were pretty instrumental in the community, and that people needed to go to their places, their farms, to get certain products or whatever. And one of them was Mr. Ferguson. And so they renamed that street to Ferguson Street so that people would know the way to get to Mr. Ferguson's farm.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting about this is that Mr. Ferguson's farm, and this is, remember, people from the square area wanting to get to his farm was about where First Baptist Church is. So you didn't have real far to go.
Yeah, just
but
a few
remember,
blocks.
you're
Wow.
on foot or you're on horse. You're not
Yes.
in a car back then.
Wow.
And Mr. Ferguson also lined the boundary of his farm in bodark trees. So he was responsible for the name of bodark on the bodark, which is still in existence. But they renamed whichever one that was on Ferguson to him. Same thing with Mr. Irwin.
Okay.
And that's where Irwin Street got its name.
Okay.
Now,
Cool.
College is a whole different story.
Yeah, this was a very interesting part of your presentation, is how college came to be and why the city did that. I'd love to share that with folks.
Okay, so that kind of spurs you down another rabbit hole. So Tyler had 3 very prominent governors in a row that came from the city of Tyler that became the governor of the state of Texas. 3 in a row. We haven't had any since, but for 3 different terms, we had one from Tyler. Politics was very prevalent here. Tyler was more of a political hub. We also had one of our U.S. senators in Horace Chilton, where Chilton Street gets its name.
Okay.
And we had Mr. Bonner, who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives for the state of Texas. It's part of the Bonneker-Winokur McLennan House family. So that was all going on at the same time. But one of those governors was Governor Hubbard, and you've heard the stories about Governor Hubbard, and one of the things he was able to do, and he was from Tyler, he was able to pass through legislation that was the piece that originally created the University of Texas and Texas A&M systems that exist today. So that was when they were formed, and it was his legislation. Since he was from Tyler, and after the legislation it was passed, there was discussion as to where to put the flagship campuses for these universities. And so the University of Texas flagship, most of the politicians thought, well, it really should be in Austin, because the state capital's in Austin.
Right.
But there was a lot of debate whether it should be or not, and so cities decided they would just put in a proposal. And Governor Hubbard, being from Tyler, wanted Tyler to put in one. So about where Caldwell School is now,
yes,
many people don't realize, but Caldwell School that exists today, that building was the first Tyler Junior College.
Really?
The first Tyler High School was in where the parking lot of Caldwell School is, because the high school went all the way out to Front Street.
Huh.
Which, side note, by the way, Front Street got its name because that was the front of the city limits at one time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was where once you crossed Front Street, you were out of the city limits.
Oh my gosh, that's insane. I mean, this building is on Front Street.
That's right.
And
we're almost out of the city limits.
Yes, we consider ourselves downtown. I tell people we're downtown. Come downtown to the studio, and we've been in this building since the beginning too. But this building actually has some pretty cool history too. Going back to I always get them. I think it's Hunt. Was originally an oil company that had a business here, but then for a long time this was the Exxon building, and actually had an Exxon logo on the front. And I guess the landmen and all that had offices here at some point.
Yeah, it was the Exxon. It was Humble first.
Humble, that's right.
Humble Oil Company, and then it became Exxon, and then they built a big new office out off of Brookside Drive. It's the Exxon building is where where Hibbs Hallmark Insurance is. That became the Exxon building.
Oh, okay.
And then when Exxon left, that's when Hibbs Hallmark took that building. That was the building after this one.
Okay.
But right there, we also had a higher education institution building in that Caldwell School area. It was about 3 or 4 stories tall. So the city of Tyler said, you know what, we'll give you that whole building if you put the flagship campus here. We'll give it to you fully furnished. We're going to rename the street that it would be on to College Street. And then we're also going to spin another street off of it called University. So you've got University that runs from College just inside of Front, one's little short street that runs down to Broadway.
Yes.
That's University. And then you've got College. And that's why those 2 streets' names were changed.
And that was to try to get the college
Try to get the
here.
flagship located here. More to that story. So the legislature decided that it was too controversial of a subject to make the recommendation all on their own. So they decided to put it out to a vote to the whole state of Texas, to the citizens to vote for. And Austin had put on a whole campaign. The city of Galveston put on a huge campaign for it.
Really?
Yeah. Well, and Galveston was a bigger population, bigger economic area at that time because of the Port of Galveston.
Yes.
And eventually the university's first medical school was in Galveston as well. But so anyway, there was this campaign to get different people to vote, and really the 2 that surfaced the most were Galveston and Austin, but they got mudslinging, name calling, tremendously political, nasty, kind of what we witnessed today going on. And so they were really vicious at each other, mad at each other, and all this stuff. And Tyler kind of came along with its own campaign and all this stuff. This is a true story. So Galveston got so friggin' mad at excuse my
That's okay.
language. Yeah. Got so friggin' mad at Austin, they decided they were going to pull one on them. So they came to Tyler and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to throw all of our support to y'all.
Oh, okay.
So the election took place and Tyler won.
We did.
But
now what happened?
But wait a minute, the flagship's not here.
Yes.
But that was not the final say, of course. The legislature still had to make the decision. And the legislature still said, it really needs to be in the state capitol. So after all that,
Yeah.
it still ended at Boston. But we gave it our best, and Galveston, we probably owe one to.
It's like, this was the choice of the people. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Wow. So
that's exactly how the current courthouse got decided too. A lot of people don't know that.
Why is that?
Well, because when all the history in the last 25 or 30 years, to me, people will see pictures of the previous courthouse and go, "Why did they tear that down for that courthouse we have now?"
That is a burning question.
Why did they do that?
Yes.
And so.
Because
I get a big kick out of it.
If you're not familiar, folks, we got to let people know. Okay. If you're not familiar, we used to have this beautiful ornate courthouse that had columns on all four sides, and it had like a tower at the top. I mean, it was a beautiful structure, and we tore it down. Everybody says they tore it down and built the box of a courthouse that we have now, which is more of an Art Deco type of design. Sure, it was great probably in its day, but everybody longs for the look that we had originally. So that's where Henry's coming from when he says, why did they tear down what we had?
So if you go back and look at what happened and who they were, so the county obviously oversees the courthouse.
Yes.
The county commissioner said, this is too controversial of a decision, just like the state legislature did. It said, so we're going to call for an election and put it out to the citizens of Smith County to vote. That's what they did. And interestingly enough, you know how long it takes to get something on a ballot and to finally make a decision in today's time?
Yes.
This all took place in about 6 weeks.
Wow.
And they decided to do that like in March, and in mid-April they had the election, and the citizens of Smith County voted to tear that down.
So they is we.
They is we.
and so we decided to tear that down.
Which was very smart on the commissioner's part, because they didn't get the finger pointed at them.
I mean, you can't go back and blame them.
Of course, none of those people are around anymore. But
right. And all of us since are like, what were they thinking?
But, so now you've almost come full circle. We are going to we're now in the process of rebuilding another courthouse that's going to look a lot like the original courthouse, which, by the way, that wasn't the original, the previous courthouse.
Yes.
And they put it out to a vote, and the citizens voted to do it. Okay. So they voted to tear the current one down and build another new one.
That looks
but
like
it's going to look like the one that first kind of
ironic with air quotes.
Yeah. So I found it kind of interesting just recently. The construction has started on it.
Yes.
And to do it, we had to close part of a street and we had to tear down a section of the square.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so many people all of a sudden were up in arms. Why are they tearing that part of the square down?
Yes,
they're destroying those beautiful buildings in history, and I'm like, where were you when we voted? A year ago?
Because that was part of the vote was
to tear that down.
Did you not look and see where those buildings were going when you did this? But yeah, there are. I've got a friend who actually used to work for the show who's on the state Main Street. In the state Main Street office, and they came by this studio, and we were talking about what's going on in downtown Tyler, and they were complaining about the side of the square that was now being torn down. At the time when they came by, it was they were tearing it down, and I'm like, that's what the
people said to do.
Yeah, the people said to do it, and it's what we wanted. And 3 of the buildings I think were burned out anyway, and 2 of them had no interior to them anymore. And then one was the historic Arcadia Theater, which was now operating as a law office. And then there were some other buildings back in behind that too that had some significance. But to make way for the new courthouse, the residents of Smith County voted, and here we are.
Yeah, that's right. So. Be careful what you say, because you might be looking in the mirror.
They is we, or we are they, something like that. But Henry, we've kept you here for the better part of an hour now, and we could probably sit and talk to you a whole lot more, because your knowledge about the city of Tyler is outstanding. How do folks get a hold of you if they would like to maybe have you come speak to their civic groups or whatever, and kind of share some of these details with them?
Well, like you mentioned earlier, that I do run the Chamber of Commerce here in Tyler, so they can call the chamber and find me anytime.
Find out anything you want to know about living, working, or doing business here in Tyler and the surrounding area. Henry can help you out there. Henry, when you get that book done too, by the way, we're going to want to know how to get that too, because that's going to be like 3 or 4 times the size of this little thing that we did.
We'll see. We'll see for sure.
All right. Well, I'm gonna be prodding you about that every now and then. Like, hey, Henry, how's the book coming? Have you written anything yet?
Yeah, I bring it up enough that I get that all the time.
Yeah.
So I guess got to stay after me. I got to have that right ghostwriter type person to help me. So that's find
awesome.
out.
Well, come back and see us anytime, man. Thanks for being a guest today.
You bet. I'll be happy to.
All right, folks, Henry Bell here on Expedition Texas, the podcast, and we are presented to you each and every week here from now on by Crazy Water. Be sure to check them out, Crazy Water from Mineral Wells, Texas. You're going to love it. You can get them in the Brookshire stores around Texas, lots of other stores, H-E-B, Kroger, and so many others. And, of course, next time you travel out to Mineral Wells, be sure to make a trip by and pick up your own case of Crazy Water or get some and fill your bottle straight out of the well there at the Famous Water Company. But thanks to Crazy Water and Famous Water Company for being a sponsor here on Expedition Texas, the podcast. We will see you next week, folks. For Henry Bell, I'm Bob Malden. We'll see you next time.